The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
Welcome to another episode of the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author. We have a lot to get through today, so let's get right to it. We are going to start in Miami, right by MIA, Miami, and Beat Culture Brewing. They have been on this show before, but before they've been talking about beers. And one of the things that they've really started to get into are meads, honey wine, that stuff that the Vikings used to drink. So we are going to be talking with co-founder Alan Espinosa about their newfound love for the bee juice, fermenting it, where mead fits in with Miami's cocktail culture, and all the interesting legal differences between mead and beer in the Sunshine State. Enjoy. I know the word mead from going to Renaissance festivals and looking at like Vikings and stuff. Sure. So let's just start off like on a pie in the sky basis. What exactly is mead?
So mead, also honey wine, which is also how we do our branding. We use honey wine and mead interchangeably, both on our labels, on our marketing, and just all that. So at least for the local market, has an idea of what mead is, and that it is a honey-based fermented product that we use. Us in particular, we use a combination of white wine yeast for the most part, and sometimes red, and just different type of yeast too. That it's at the baseline, it's all honey with a little bit of a diluent of water.
So it's not just like a honey flavored beer. This is a completely different product with completely different legal requirements and everything.
Yeah, most definitely. So it is identified as a wine. So it is a honey-based wine, completely fermentable. There's no malted barley. The ones that we do typically don't have hops. We do fruited meads for the most part. So it's all local honey. We use a local honey monger by the name of the native guy. His name's Nick Bofil. He has beehives all over South Florida, Central Florida. Our traditional base is made out of orange blossom honey. And he sometimes procures different like mangrove honey, actually blueberry honey that we just source, a very small batch of it. So imagine if it produces fruit, it has flowers, you can make a honey out of it.
And the different honeys from the different flowers, do they have drastically different flavors to where when you go through and you make a mead out of it, you can taste a lot of those differences?
Yeah, so depending on the flower or the tree or the actual plant, the honey is going to be light years different. So, for example, lychee, the honey might not taste like lychee. However, but when you ferment it, you have a totally different product. So the base honey might taste like one thing, but when you ferment it, you're going to have a whole new different profile associated with it.
Interesting. And I know that you've been brewing beer for years and years and years and years. How did you get started into mead, and what was the process like of learning how to do that? Because I assume that it's a very different beast when it comes to the production than beer is.
Most definitely. So I first started, this whole love affair started in undergrad when I was studying microbiology and anaerobic respiration and unicellular organism, that's yeast. I started just dabbling in all things fermentable, from beer to hot sauce, and then mead shortly was part of that list. So the process of mead is, for us, it's a little bit easier than it is for beer. Beer requires a lot more intensity. You got to mill the grain. You got to add hops. So it's a lot more of a process. So when we incorporated mead into our production schedule, it was a lot easier for us to manage. So if you have a meadery, making beer is going to be more challenging. If you have a brewery, making mead is going to be a little bit easier.
Interesting. And because of, I guess, the nature of the different honeys that you get and whatnot, with Beat Culture, with the beers that you have a certain number of core beers that you always keep on tap, and then you've got a lot of rotators. With the meads, do you have a certain couple meads that you always have available year round and then do rotators from that as well? Or is it a lot more open and freeform and what you get is what you get and you don't get upset?
It's a combination of both. So our mead has a pretty high demand. So whenever we make it, it typically sells out pretty quickly. So we try to keep some on all the time, but it sells out pretty fast. So we have our staples, our guava mead. Can't Believable is one of our more staples. Right now we have Neo Noir and Mango Libre. And Neo Noir is our blackberry oak mead, and Mango Libre is, as the name infers, our mango oak mead. So it's typically all orange blossom honey. We really like the way it ferments, as that sweetness, good body, good residual sugar, that it complements fruits. So at the end of the day, a lot of what we do are these fruited melomel type of meads. And for us, orange blossom fits the mold. But that's not to say we don't dabble in Melaleuca honey or other different derivatives.
How is mead actually served? Because obviously, you've got the various pint glasses or whatnot for the different kinds of beers. I would assume that you don't have a full pour of mead the way that you would have even a full pour of wine.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right on the head. So even though some folks here, they might indulge in a full bottle, right? But typically we serve it, it's a 4-ounce pour. It's like a port. It's like a nice dessert fruited wine that it's a small dose. It's a 4-ounce pour. We also when we sell our bottles, it's resealable. So we have a little cap that you could bung it up again, take it home, pour a little bit, put it back in the fridge. That's really what we want. We don't particularly want you to overindulge. We want you to be able to have that drinkability. So for the most part, it's a 4-ounce pour. I mean, again, if you want to hammer down a whole bottle on your own, it's all good. But typically, much like a whiskey, a port, a nice wine, it's smaller pours compared to like a rice lager. You can hammer down a pint of that and no problem. It's not quite. You got to remember, it's 14% ABV, and if you do hammer down 16 ounces of it, it might do some damage. Yeah,
that's amazing. And you said that it sells out pretty fast. Were you amazed on how much the Miami-Dade cocktail alcohol community embraced the mead? Because it's very much a vodka sort of town. And I know a lot of brewers are saying that it takes a little while for a brewery to connect, and yet it seems like mead just exploded.
Yeah, so Miami's a little bit of a different creature compared to the rest of the state. When we look at places like Tampa, Orlando, the beer scene is a lot more developed. Even though Miami has a much higher density, the market and the culture is very, very different. So being really the only mead makers down here, a lot of what we do is education. So that's why we use honey wine mead interchangeably. We make sure we offer samples so people can try it, and it kind of develops a palate, letting know that this thing exists. So even sometimes when we started branding it as mead only, people like meat, M-E-A-T, what? You sell meat, alcoholic meat? No, mead. So as soon as that happens, like, oh, okay, gotcha. Because, I mean, much like you, right? We're a little bit more in tune with all things fermentable alcoholic products. So whether we indulge in it ourselves or we're just aware of it, for the market down here, they're just not as savvy. So they're very receptive. Even though you mentioned Miami very much is a vodka town, but the beer scene is very much emerging. And with the beer scene emerging, that means they might be looking for something else. Or like the bourbon scene out here is developing quite rapidly. So they might be looking for something else, right? And I think that's where honey wine mead has that foothold. So with education, it's slow and sometimes painful, but that's what we do. As a craft brewery in a market that might not be familiar with craft breweries, besides doing the best we can as making a good product, is making sure folks understand what it is, how it's made, local fruit, local product, and that at the end of the day, it's tasty and it blows every other commoditized product out of the water.
It's amazing. Now, there's a lot of other wineries in the state, and they are able to ship their product. Obviously, with the breweries, the beer, that's something a little bit different. But is there any plan to be able to package and ship your mead to other people in the state or anywhere in the other states that might be listening and interested in getting some?
Absolutely. So to your point, Florida, the laws are kind of wonky. Liquor laws, right? Beer laws and wine laws, they're light years different. For example, liquor laws, if you're a distillery, you can only sell 6 bottles per person per year, which seems insane. You can't even serve cocktails. You can do samples, but you can't sell a pour of your distilled product, right? Now, breweries, we could have a tap room, we could sell cans, kegs, we could do all that, but we can't ship our beer. Wineries, however, could do everything, all the pros of a brewery, all the pros of a distillery, and ship your product, right? Right now, we're actually, to your point, we're very much working on being able to ship more of our mead out. We're scaling up our mead program now as we speak, doing a lot more barrel aging, a lot more fermentation spaces coming in for our mead to be able to address the local market and also be able to ship it. For one, we want to address the local community, then Florida, once that's addressed, and then we'll work on for the rest of the state.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Pleasure's mine, always.
So from Miami, we are going to travel a little bit north to Pompano Beach and Black Flamingo Brewery. They are very close to their counterparts Banging Banjo, and you're going to start seeing a lot more Black Flamingo branded locations popping up in Broward County in the near future. But their co-owner and brewmaster Manny Jannes has been in the South Florida beer scene for years, and I've actually spoken to him many times at beer festivals and such. And he has always brought a lot of his upbringing and his culture to the beers that he makes and the outfits that he has been with. And so I wanted to chat with him a little bit more about that, about bringing that Hispanic influence into brewing, which traditionally, for better or for worse, tends to be very much a white male-centered business. I'm always a big fan of multiculturalism, and I do love a lot of the influences that he brings in both his recipes and his names, some of which I cannot repeat here. But I wanted to talk to Manny a little bit more about that, a little bit how he and other people are starting to blaze that trail in craft beer here in the state of Florida. You technically have 2 breweries-ish.
Well, technically, it's more than that.
Oh, no.
Yeah, technically, it's more than that. We're working on several projects right now for Black Flamingo. We've got the project here in Pompano. We've also got the project in Oakland Park that should be open in a couple of months, and we've got another project that we're working on in downtown Hollywood. And there's another project that we're working on that I'm going to leave it as a surprise right now, but yeah, we've got several projects that we're working on, all Black Flamingo. And so we're kind of, we're not trying to saturate the market. It's just, we've gotten these opportunities. My partner and I, Andres, we've gotten these opportunities. And so instead of just letting them go through the wayside or giving them to someone else, we've kind of taken it upon ourselves because we feel like we offer, not just culturally, but within our 4 walls, we offer some pretty cool and interesting beer combinations. And so we figure if we can tell that story on multiple locations, each one uniquely tell that story, I think that we don't saturate our product and our brand. We don't cannibalize our own business, right? Keep them unique and still culturally the same kind of brewery, right?
Well, and the good question is that, was it important to you to bring that culture into the various businesses and various concepts that you have and are currently building?
Oh, absolutely. Look, my partner and I, we're both Latinos, right? And so it's who we are. It's how we were raised. Andres is Colombian. I was born here, but I'm from Cuban and Nicaraguan parents. And, we've grown up in households where you speak Spanish or you get your ear pulled or the chancleta comes out or, it's one of those things. So it's deep in our blood. And yes, we're still American. I'm American and he's American as well. But, we want to get to our roots. We feel like we've got something to offer, our story that we can tell culturally through our beers and through our tap room. I know the audience can't see, but we have a very tropical feel, an eclectic tropical feel. I mean, just being Black Flamingo in and of itself is tropical, and so we want to let people know that we've got these really cool things that we can offer, not just palate-wise, but aesthetically. And so that's kind of where our culture kind of comes in, and it's an important factor in what we do. We like to name our beers. We use a lot of Spanish names in our beers, and we have a nice time explaining to customers what that means. You know,
I've had some beers of yours where you couldn't actually give me the explanation because of the nature of it, but you danced around it as best you could.
yeah, you know, it's weird because if you let me name a beer, it's always going to go, you know, south real quick. So, but we have fun with it. And so, yeah, we try to merge the cultures together. We try to give people a little bit of our flavor. You know, to give you an example, we have a Russian Imperial Stout that we age inside of rum barrels that we call two birds, one chancleta, right?
And I guess for people that don't know, I know, what is a chancleta?
So chancleta essentially is the flip-flop that your mother or grandmother wears that is always at arm's length. So when you're misbehaving, it comes at you like a boomerang, right? And so that's in every household. You have a mom or a grandmother or an abuela, you know, a grandmother ready with the chancleta at hand. So, you know, it's a play on two birds, one stone. And, you know, in this case, it's two birds, one chancleta. And so we play a little bit with those kind of names. And then we try to integrate, you know, our cultural flavors into the beers that we make, you know.
Now, obviously with craft beer, there's a lot that's been written about and a lot that's been discussed about how monocultural the industry is. It's traditionally a male-dominated, white male-dominated industry. When you wanted to come into this and you wanted to bring that sort of cultural influence that you've grown up with, were there any other breweries or any other businesses that you looked to for inspiration on how to incorporate who you were into this sort of field?
Not really. You know, the South Florida beer scene is relatively new compared to the rest of the United States. I mean, we're growing fast, and you're seeing a lot of Latino brewers naturally, right? There's a lot of Latin Americans, Cuban Americans, Nicaraguan Americans, Colombian Americans, and that live in South Florida. And so you get to see an integration of that, but not really. You know, when we started out, there weren't a lot of craft breweries. You had Miami Brewing Company, which is different than MIA, right? At that time, MIA was actually most wanted, and it was a home brew. There were home brewers at the time. You had Wynwood, that was a brewery in planning with the two Lewises, and you know they're Puerto Rican, and that was kind of it. You didn't really have a lot, and so a lot of the home brewing community, most of us in South Florida, were Latino. Yes, they're the guys from Invasive, right? Those guys are great, but they're not Latino. But the majority of us were Latin. So it was funny, and I don't want to say like we were the first. You know, we had a homebrew club many, many years ago called Opus Ales. And I remember we started using Spanish names for the beers, and it was a little scary. You know, we were apprehensive because we didn't know how it would take, right? It was not only just such a male-dominant industry, but, you know, white male-dominant industry. Yeah. And so how would people take it if you started to call beers in Spanish? So I hadn't seen any beers with Spanish names yet. You know, we hadn't seen it in the home brewing, and we hadn't seen it professionally because there were no real breweries, right? And so we started coming out with these Spanish names for this, and just really cool things that Hispanics knew were saying in Cuban, right? Or that it would make people laugh. And just to kind of get to reel them in and make them a little bit more comfortable with what the beer was. So, you know, after that, it just kind of natural, right? You're in South Florida. There's a bunch of, you know, Latinos. You're going to have Spanish names for beers because you have to identify with the culture.
Now, how is it difficult, or I guess what kind of a balancing act do you have to where it remains authentic, but not so much to where it seems more like a marketing ploy to fit in and cash in on the community and the culture?
It's tricky, you know, because like everybody knows, it's hard to come up with names for beers nowadays, right? And every once in a while, you can make a beer, and that beer, the name matches the story of the beer, right? Takes you on a journey. You know, for example, we have a beer on draft that we just kicked it, but we have it every year. We make it for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and it's called I Love the Tatas. Obviously, that beer in and of itself already tells you what it's about, right? We're celebrating people going through these tough times for breast cancer awareness, right? So when you're able to create a story around a beer, that's great. But because all these names are being taken up, you kind of have to play the game of, it has to be catchy and it has to be marketing to reel you in. Now, you want the liquid to match the name, right? You want the liquid to be incredible, right? And you want the name to be funny or catchy or whatever the draw is. But yeah, it's always nice to tell a story behind every name, right? But I think for the most part, the market's at a point where it's just about putting a cool name on something. For the most part, not everybody does that. We don't always do it for all our beers. There's some beers that we do that we have names that are, purposeful and they have a meaning behind what the beer is. But yeah, sometimes just a cool way of a good conversation piece.
Nice. Now, much more than just the names, you also try to bring a lot of that influence into the recipes. How do you generally kind of showcase the recipes as a way to showcase the cultural influences?
Well, a few years ago, there were so many fruits out there, so many spices, and so many cooking techniques, just to borrow from cooking, that you could take, and they were innovative in the Spanish culture, right? In the Hispanic culture, you could take these things and bring them into beer, and nobody had ever heard of them. But because our particular market is growing so fast, and you do have a lot of Latinos or brewing or own breweries, these influences are quickly put into play. So yeah, there was a time where it was really innovative, bringing in fruits like lulo, right? Or cachucha, or all these different exotic fruits that you can't get, by ordering it from a regular brewery supply store, right? You have to have someone that's a distributor that brings them in from Peru or from El Salvador or Santo Domingo and be able to use these exotic fruits. Now, you're seeing more and more breweries because you got to put something out new, right? Everybody wants something new, fresh, that hasn't been tried before. You're seeing more and more of these breweries taking those risks, right? Because you got to take a risk to really kind of put this in a beer, some of these ingredients that have never been used before, and implementing them in these recipes to give someone an experience, When I first started home brewing, we went to a competition and we won a competition using tamarind, Nobody was using tamarind at the time, but we made a beer using tamarind. We won the competition. I mean, the beer tasted great, but it did help that nobody had ever had a beer with tamarind, right? That kind of also pushes the envelope when you're doing something innovative. Now, you see plenty of beers during the summer and spring and summer with tamarind. So, yeah, I think it's important for us culturally to maintain that, keep on cultivating that, because it shows people who we are, and it keeps us grounded in our culture, which I think is great. Look, I don't think there's anything better than the American beer market. Nothing out there in the world is better than the American beer market. We're incredibly innovative. We're not afraid to push the boundaries. As a matter of fact, we make those boundaries every time a new style comes out. But I think there's something to be said about the South Florida beer culture in, piggybacking off of that American beer experience, because I think in the food culture, when you think about it, people love Spanish food because it's so bold in flavor and all these ingredients and all these things going on. And you're seeing that translation in the beers being made.
Awesome. I completely agree. I'm waiting for somebody to use Mamey.
Oh, we do a beer with Mamey. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. We do a beer with Mamey.
I'll have to come back.
Yeah, it's a little. It's almost like it's a milkshake because we use lactose, right? We use Mamey in it as well, and we put that on nitro, and so it's like a milkshake, but it's delicious, man. We usually, that comes out during the summer months. Yeah.
Nice. How has the Hispanic community, especially here in South Florida, especially in Miami-Dade, reacted to the craft beer sort of explosion? Traditionally, it's a cocktail market, and if beer is consumed, it's usually something simple like Presidente or Corona or one of those. And now you've got all these brewers with these fantastical recipes and varied flavors and so on.
It's interesting because South Florida as a market is a very strange market, right? It's unlike any other market there is out there. And we can go on and on for hours talking about this, but in a snapshot, I think that there's so much beer out there right now, and more people are finding it cool and trendy, not in a negative way, but cool and trendy to be able to say something like, let me have an IPA I'm into that now because I saw somebody post it or I saw it in Publix or whatever, the local supermarket. And so it's more accessible. 4 or 5 years ago, those beers are not really accessible to everybody. Now you go to a regular restaurant and there's, I hate to say it is, macro, but there's an IPA on tap and there's a Belgian wit on tap. Those things are available for people. So they're able to experiment a little bit more. And you're seeing servers a little bit, they're not as, hesitant to say, hey, I think this beer pairs well with this meal, right? And doing that suggestive selling. And so I think in general, the Latin market still has a long way to go because Pilsners and lagers are still king in those countries, right? In the Caribbean and in Central and South America, that's what sells. But you're starting to see more and more in South Florida, you're starting to see more and more people gravitate towards, your other beer styles because they're out there and they're in your face, right? To me, there's a bit of an issue with saturation because, it's everybody all the time in your face. This is what you've got. And it's a good thing in that, our market is growing quickly, but it's a bad thing in that people don't get educated, right? And so the waters are a little muddy. There's breweries out there that are, wolves in sheep's clothing, and I'm not going to mention them, but and then there's actual people doing the work, and they're local and they're doing it on their own steam and they're trying really hard to get people to be educated about their beer. So, I think that there's a bit of a battle there, but at the end of the day, if the liquid is good and more people are learning about it, especially the Latin American culture whose palates don't really correlate to stronger beers or beers with a lot of flavor, I think we're on the right track, regardless of who's pushing it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
No problem, brother. Anytime.
Hey there, fellow Florida beer enthusiast. We now have an official Patreon. In case you are unfamiliar, Patreon is a great way for a community to support the creators of the content you love, like the Florida Beer Podcast. If you're enjoying the content we bring you on this show or any of the shows on the Florida Podcast Network, you can help ensure that content keeps coming through for a small monthly donation equal to the price of a couple cups of coffee a month. So for just a few lattes, you can make a real difference. And the first goal of FPN's Patreon program is to help me get a better mobile setup to use whenever I can start traveling to great breweries here in the state of Florida. So if today's episode brought you valuable insights and information, please help see that these episodes keep coming by becoming a patron. Head to patreon.com/Florida Podcast Network to support the show, and it comes with some pretty sweet benefits. Want access to bonus extras? Nostalgic for these old school radio shoutouts? Lover of good quality merchandise? Well, not only will your monthly contribution help me grow the show, but you'll get some cool stuff in return. So please head to patreon.com/Florida Podcast Network for further details to become a patron. That's Patreon, patreon.com/Florida Podcast Network. You can also find the link right there in the show notes or by visiting floridabeerpodcast.com. Thank you in advance for your continued support. For those of you lucky enough to live in or around St. Petersburg, Florida, you will know that its reputation as a craft beer center in the state of Florida is up and coming, to the point where I am starting to consider it to be one of the most important cities in craft beer in the United States total, not just here in the state of Florida. And they are still opening up new craft breweries. In fact, they just had one not too long ago in the form of Grand Central Brew House, which is intended to be an anchor for the Grand Central District, a particular section of their downtown area, which with breweries such as Three Daughters, Cage, Pinellas Ale Works right around the corner, and If I Brewed the World. So we're going to chat with founder and CEO Kevin Mielke about Grand Central Brew House, creating this new focal center point for craft beer in that particular area of St. Petersburg, and opening in the middle of a pandemic. So, Kevin, always the first question when you decide to build a brewery is, of course, the location. And what drew you to St. Pete in general and the Grand Central District in particular?
Yeah. First, thanks for having me. Well, I've lived in St. Petersburg for almost 30 years now, and it just love to be a part and see the city grow the way it has. And as downtown has gotten busier and busier, I was most drawn to the Grand Central District, which is a little more west of the heart of downtown, a growing district that has it's a different culture. There's more arts and crafts and small shops, and there are some existing craft breweries as well. So a very unique part of the city that kind of frowns on, large box stores, and there's no chain restaurants or bars or anything like that. It's a real unique neighborhood. So that was where I focused on the brewery.
And it's interesting that you mentioned, because they are anchored. They've had three daughters as a longtime tenant in the area, and then of course they were home to other locations like Cage and Pinnell Sail Works and If I Brewed the World, and right around the corner, obviously. You're a little bit removed from that area in terms of that one central focus, and you took over the lot of the old taco bus, which continues to break my heart to this day that they closed. I guess, what about that specific location sort of made you say, this is where to put what is an absolutely gorgeous new facility?
Oh, yeah. Well, I will step back and say my plan wasn't to build from ground up from the beginning. I planned to have a brewery like almost all other breweries, and the culture of it is to renovate an old warehouse or a gas station or fire station. But I was driving down the street, down Central Avenue one day, not really even looking for a spot, and just noticed the for sale sign on the property that was most recently the taco bus. And historically speaking, it was a car dealership back in the 50s. So if you can picture just a small rectangle building, about 1,000 square feet, and a big old parking lot. So that's what it was. So it was the location. I almost couldn't believe it. It's like, wow, that is for sale, and just got the wheels spinning that, like, hey, maybe building something would be right, because the location just seemed perfect.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you've got new construction, you've got alcohol and everything, but you also have a city that is no stranger to breweries. And the mayor of St. Pete, Rick Kriesman, has always been supportive of that. How is the rest of the city when it comes to everything that it takes to go through getting inspections and getting sign-offs, and what it takes to open up a brewery?
It definitely was with some frustrations and challenges and I don't know, there's so much going on in the city that there were plenty of delays just getting the building permit to begin with. Once you file, you design it, you work with your architect, and you file, and you think the permit approval should be about a 3-month process, but it took closer, 5 or 6. So there definitely are some frustrations. Most notably, you have fire department officials that don't seem to agree with building department officials, and they inspect things and review things. They review them independently, and then they don't see eye to eye, and it gets to be a struggle to get an approval on something until they're on board. And then even once you file your plan and you build it, and they come and inspect it when you're just about to open, and they don't like something that they previously approved, and you have to change it. So So, I'm not trying to be completely negative at all about the working with the city, because by and large, they, I understand what they're going through. But we definitely had some challenges and frustrations with getting the final approval. But, overall, the city's great to work with. The mayor is amazing. And I understand you're just dealing with individuals in building departments, and sometimes it just takes one or two. And honestly, I think a lot of the later delays came from, COVID didn't help, because you had people in offices some days and some at home. The whole communication stream, I could think, within a bigger city government building, it was strained for sure, because just trying to get people on the same page was difficult, and it slowed things down. But we got through it a few months later than expected, but it's okay.
Well, and I was going to say, how much did the Grand Central community and sort of business district help with a lot of that? Because it seems that they are really starting to ramp up their identity, ramp up the culture, ramp up the meeting with everybody, and sort of trying to band together as a group.
Yeah. Well, the executive director of our district, the Grand Central District Association, his name is David Foote, and yeah, he's been very supportive. He has been of help along the way, and it is a great district of breweries. We're kind of consider 7 breweries in the district, and we're actually about to launch some kind of a marketing program that David has organized with the breweries called the Grand Central District Breweries, and a map is going to be coming out soon, and so we're all kind of share together, and just with the goal of having people just come to the district and by Uber, ideally, or some other mode of transportation park and sample, just walk around the different breweries. So, but David's been great. It's a great district. I thought it would be when I bought the property, and it's kind of exceeded my expectations to be a part of the Grand Central District.
That is actually kind of amazing. I love when districts and areas have the brewery maps, and it really sort of builds tourism, which I think is one of the best parts about the Florida craft beer community. So you've got a space, you're starting to build, and then I know that you also have a head brewmaster in Tyler Singletary who used to be over at Flying Boat, and I had this stuff there, and it was absolutely fantastic. So you definitely got a great person. When it came to the actual design, did you have Tyler come in first and sort of design with a brewer's mentality, or how did that sort of work?
Tyler did get on board fairly early. I had already been well underway with the main construction design, working with the architect. This was, before I met Tyler. So the basic construction of there's 2 buildings on the property. There's the brewery building, and then the adjacent building is going to be a restaurant that's still under kind of interior build out phase right now. So, but it's a lot of the basic framework of the building and the design to incorporate my vision was already in place. But Tyler came along fairly early on to really review the brewery operation space. He certainly was helpful in the overall project, but there was a lot of input from Tyler when it came to how to lay out the brewery. And I think we wound up expanding it a little bit once he came aboard, and we added a lab that he wanted up on the second floor. So Tyler was extremely helpful and influential, throughout the project.
Awesome. And I kind of want to take a few seconds to talk about the actual facility itself, because it's very expansive. There's a lot of absolutely beautiful brick to it. You've got that second floor, but a lot of it seems to be very open air and just sort of inviting and sort of communal.
Yeah. And that was by design, and it actually has worked out really well here, opening in the middle of a pandemic, that outdoor space. But I had a vision I got a lot of ideas from my travels around the world and within this country. And one thing I definitely like with traditional beer gardens. I told the architect, I said, I really want a big beer garden with traditional Munich, Bavarian style beer garden tables and that kind of look and feel, as well as outdoor space on the second floor. Because I know how much people love to be up on, roofs or terraces overlooking a busy street and people watch. And those things, the architect worked in, and I'm real pleased, because most of the capacity of the whole indoor outdoor is 440, and with probably, most of it, about 250 is considered 250 to 260 is outside outdoor space, and the rest being indoor. So that was by design for, I guess, most of the year. People want to be outside, but plenty of indoor space as well when it gets real hot or rainy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And, it's definitely been interesting that you kind of built it the way that you did when you did. So I hate to ask this question almost, but in terms of COVID, how did that affect your construction? And then how did that affect the vision for what you wanted it to look like when the facility finally opened?
It did affect construction. We were rolling along pretty well. We broke ground in early December of 2019, and obviously for the first several months there was, no one knew what COVID was. But then even after, things were kind of rolling fine. But at some point in the middle of the summer, we did get impacted. There were some of the contractors working on the property contacted COVID, and we shut down operation completely for about a week. And just kind of disinfect it and do that. And, I think that took the momentum away, unfortunately, but understandable. And then, as things got rolling, we had another delay related to just supply chain issues. Yes, one that jumps to mind was our pavers, because normally, like, the landscape people just could expect that they can just call and say, hey, we need such and such amount of pavers, and then they have them. And then when we needed them, they found out that, well, they wound up shutting down their operation a while back, and due to COVID, and so there wasn't any stock of it. So there were a few other examples, but definitely impacted it. And at the end of the day, we wound up taking about 2 to 3 months longer than planned, which I guess in the scheme of things isn't terrible, but absolutely COVID impacted things.
Did it affect your food operations? Because you said that there is going to be a restaurant there. And one of the things that talking with a lot of brewers during the shutdown and during the economic turbulence that we just had was that a lot of brewers had to scramble to get a 509 license to cook and serve food, because that was the only way for them to be able to open. Mm-hmm. Did that sort of, seeing everybody else go through those situations, did that affect kind of what you wanted the brewery to be once it finally opened?
It did. In a few months, at the time when we thought we were getting close to open, the bars and breweries were still shut down. So I went ahead and submitted my application for the 509 restaurant license. And we were going to have a hot dog roller and a pretzel warmer. Got through the planning phase, and just about when we got approved by the state, at least the plans were approved. This was pre-inspection from the Department of Business Professional Relations and their health inspection. The governor lifted the rules, but I still went ahead and said, well, maybe it'd be still helpful just in case we shut down again to have the restaurant license. But yeah, frankly, the inspector came and we didn't pass it because we had the food that was going to cook like out in the main bar area, and we have these nice roll-up crown doors, and it's a lot of open air. I didn't design the brewery to be a restaurant, and so we just couldn't find a good kitchen space for it. And I contemplating trying to reconfigure some of the space for it, but at the end of the day, I'm just not going to go forward with the restaurant at Grand Central Brew House, because the master plan is that adjacent building, and that's part of the property that I own, is going to be a restaurant. So that was the plan, is that the other building is going to be a restaurant. I already have a tenant called La La St. Pete, and that's going to be the food, and we're going to be a brewery. So that's where it kind of ended. So right now the brewery itself is not serving food, and we're going to use food trucks for a few months until the restaurant opens.
Awesome. So, but you have opened, at least on a very limited basis. I know the grand opening was a few days ago. How has the community reacted to your opening?
Oh, very, very positively. Yeah, we've had good turnout, and honestly nothing but positive comments. So people, they love the beer first and foremost, but then they really enjoy the variety of locations to sit, especially so much outdoor space. And we received a lot of nice Google reviews that were commenting about the safety. All the employees wear masks. We have sanitizer everywhere. I have a cleaning crew that comes in every night and cleans and sanitizes. So, in addition to being like kind of wowed at a lot of the things in the breweries, like the serving tanks and just their views of the brewery and just the overall look and feel of the brick and steel and concrete structure. I think people, again, they feel safe. They like the beers, and they feel very relaxed sitting out in the beer garden, hanging out at the drink rail overlooking Central Avenue. So, yeah, very, very positive opening.
Excellent. That definitely sounds like a great place to be, and I definitely cannot wait to visit. For people that are in the area and are going to stop by, where can they find more information?
Yeah, well, we have a website up and running, so that's at grandcentralbrew.com. Also you can easily find us with the same Grand Central Brew House on Facebook and Instagram. If you do log on or pull up our website, there's an option to sign up for our newsletter too. So put your email in and get regular updates on happenings at Grand Central Brew House, new beers coming out, things like that. So lots of all the biggies, I guess, the website, Facebook, and Instagram. So No Twitter yet, but maybe someday.
Gotcha. All right, awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. Enjoyed talking to you, and if you need anything else, please don't hesitate to reach back out.
So there you go. 3 breweries, 3 amazing products, 3 amazing groups of people to definitely go out and visit or support as best you can. Definitely look forward to going out to meet Kevin and the rest of the team at Grand Central Brewhouse, and any time that I can get back to Black Flamingo or Beat Culture, it's always good for me. The Florida Beer Podcast is a production of Florida Beer Media. You can find us at floridabeerblog.com, Florida Beer Blog on Instagram or Twitter. If you're on Facebook, it's FL Beer Blog. And remember to join us every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern for our live Sunshine State Happy Hour, a exploration of all things drinking and cultural in the Florida area and beyond, actually. Florida Beer Podcast is also a production of the Florida Podcast Network, an amazing group of podcasts in and around the Sunshine State. If you want more information, go to FPN Insiders on Facebook. It's our private Facebook group where you can find out new information about shows coming up, tell us the latest places that you've been, find hints, tips, and giveaways, and so much more. Remember, that's FPN for Florida Podcast Network Insiders on Facebook. Our announcer is Jeff Brozovich. Field producer is Steve Picala. Executive producer and Grand High Poobah is Jemmy Lagonier. Remember, if you're listening to us on a podcasting app of your choice, go ahead and subscribe. And if you can, give us a nice juicy 5-star review. We don't have anything to give out and we're not selling anything, but that will help us get to the top of the charts and start looking for more people to come and join the party. Thank you so much. Happy holidays for whatever holiday you celebrate. And if you don't, happy Merry Christmas, Kwanzaa. I can't remember what that one thing that they did on Seinfeld was, the airing of the grievances. And yeah, so I'm sure somebody made a beer about it. I'll probably try to find it in the meantime. Thank you so much for listening, and drink Florida Craft.